Thank you, Halima, and thank you and welcome to our speakers and to everyone joining us this afternoon. As Halima said, we've got a lot to get through in an hour, probably less than an hour, so I'm going to crack on. And I'd like to start by inviting our wonderful speakers to introduce themselves and their work. And I think we're going to be lucky enough to see some of that work today too. So let's start with Phil Maxwell, and we're really lucky actually. We've got a film to share with you all as a way of introducing Phil. So I think Halima, are we going to play that now?
Yeah, I'm going to just screen it now. Just give me 1 sec. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm afraid it's disappeared. Just give me 1 second. I think it needs to be refreshed. Apologies. There we go.
If you look at the East End and its history, it's always been a place of immigration. So you've had the Jews, the Huguenots, the Bangladeshis, Somali people coming and living and making the East End their home. And often they've been coming here to improve their life, and they've been running away from oppression. And that creates a particular dynamic in society, which I've always been fascinated by. And if you remember in 1936, when Mosley and his fascist black shirts tried to march through East London, the Jewish community, the white working class community, Christians and everyone else, they all came to stop the black shirts from marching down into Cable Street. So there's always been a tradition of fighting prejudice and racism in the East End. There were lots of demonstrations, counter demonstrations, against the poison of fascism on Brick Lane. And I've always thought that it's the responsibility of photojournalists to capture the opposition to fascism and to record that, because opposition to fascism and racism is an integral part of our history and culture, and it needs to be recorded. Having taken a lot of anti-racist photographs of protest in and around Brick Lane in the 80s, and even in the early 90s, the National Front, who later became the British National Party, used to stand at the top of Brick Lane and sell their appalling literature, and made it my business to photograph them. What happened on these Sundays is that if anybody turned up to protest against the National Front, they were put on the other side of the road. So you weren't allowed by the police to go over. And so I was quite insistent to photograph the National Front, and the police took exception to that. And so I was arrested and carted off to Bethnal Green, Nick. And there I am.
Well, what a brilliant film, and thank you so much for sharing that. That's such an insightful photographic history and of your work as well, which has been a huge part of the Bangladesh 50 project. So thank you for that, Phil. Moving on to our next speaker, this is Magda Keaney from National Portrait Gallery. Magda, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Nishat. Yeah, my name's Magda Keaney, and I'm the Senior Curator of Photographs at the National Portrait Gallery. I just wanted to actually start by really acknowledging the citizen researchers that we have been working with, and to say what a privilege it has been to be a part of this project and this ongoing process, and I look forward to remaining a part of it. I also wanted to pay my respect to your elders, to your families, and I wanted to do this because the stories that I've been hearing and the images that I've seen have really just the idea of family, and I think of elders and respect and history has been such a strong part of what I have understood to be significant. So I would not only like to acknowledge you, but I'd like to pay respect to your elders and to the rich and vibrant community that you create and share with us all. So thank you. Thank you so much to Halima and to Sanjita for making this happen, and you guys have done so much work behind the scenes, so thank you. I really wanted to start, I've just a few minutes and I do have some slides, so I'm going to move through them really quickly, and you know, some of them are quite complex and problematic images, so I'm sorry that I will move through them quickly, but perhaps we can discuss them later. But I wanted to start with actually an observation about museums to begin that I've been really thinking about in relation to the question of whose image is it anyway, and the work that some of the conversations that I've listened to and been a part of. And I think something that I think that's so wonderful that's reinforced out of this project for me is that museums aren't static, and thank God. Because I think about the National Portrait Gallery in 1856, and I think about the National Portrait Gallery in 2000, you know, and 21. Where are we? And I just think it's important to make a really kind of basic, obvious observation in some way, which is that the values of the National Portrait Gallery and the programs that we instigate, including this, which are so exciting to us within the Portrait Gallery, are really shaped by the communities that we serve. And so this idea of who we do serve and who our communities are, I think is a really key question. And I think that, you know, with our Inspiring Peoples project, the idea of, you know, the Portrait Gallery being community-led, thinking about the fact that who Britain was in what Britain looked like, what it was to live in Britain in 1856, what it was to be British in 1856 is not the same as what it is for those things in 2021. I had a look at the collection, thinking about a number of things. Now, photographs weren't really collected by the National Portrait Gallery kind of extensively, really until the 60s and 70s. But this is actually, I'm showing you this photo of Sheikh Khidr and Queen Victoria, not because it's a Bengali subject pre-partition, but because it's the first photograph that we have recorded as being purchased by the National Portrait Gallery. And the only photographs which were really purchased, this was purchased in 1901, as it says on the label. The only photographs that were purchased, that could be purchased, were of the monarch, because there was a rule that said that no one's portrait could be brought to the portrait gallery unless they'd been dead for 10 years, and the exception was the monarch. So here we have a photograph of Queen Victoria, and it's a very, even though it looks candid in some ways, it's actually a very formal posed photograph, and all the things that are posed about it are done so to make messages and create meaning. And so at the literal centre of the photograph is Queen Victoria, and attending her is Sheikh Khidr. And so this is an image that was, you know, distributed publicly, and is really about Queen Victoria, not only as a kind of working monarch concerned with the business of Britain, but also as the Queen of the Commonwealth, you know, and a Queen of India. So, you know, and that's indicated in numerous ways. And it's a very complex photograph, because obviously the power relationship between the monarch and Sheikh Khidr is uncomfortable to us in many ways. But I just wanted to start with that photograph, because what it says to me, and what one finds, particularly looking at pre-partition, especially looking at pre-partition photographs in the portrait gallery, when Indian sitters are represented, it is always in relation to empire and the power of empire. So the next slide, please, Emily, if that's okay. Just another example of that quite quickly here, but these are photographs taken in Simla, actually a region, you know, a Bengali region, and yet they don't show any Bengali community or Indian sitters, and they are on the left. It's called the Supreme Indian Council. Again, I mean, I find that title uncomfortable, but, you know, obviously the administrators and British imperial rulers of India, and at that time, and then on the right, this group of officials and relatives. And I sort of thought that that photo could be in England, but there we are. Just really the information in the title giving us that context. The next slide. This is a photograph taken by Benjamin Stone. It's one of many photographs that Stone took, particularly around the coronation of King George VII. And at that time, numerous representatives from Commonwealth countries, including India, were invited to the UK, and there was this kind of grand procession and sense of ceremony as representatives from the Commonwealth came to pay tribute to the new king in, you know, Britain, in London, the seat of power, if you will, central power. Now, what I think is interesting here is the title, so Indian military representatives. Now, India is a huge, at this time, you know, 1902 pre-partition, but it's a huge country made up of diverse ranges of, you know, regions, kingdoms, groups, communities, and yet none of the people are actually identified as such. And in fact, in this photo, if you look at the full cataloguing details online, the only person that's identified by name is the man in the centre of the white man in the centre of the English guy in the centre of the photo. And it's so, I kind of think this again talks to a specific problem, which is, you know, this kind of positioning of Indian sitters in relation to empire, where it's actually very hard for me to go through to know which sitters, say, may be Bengali, because I don't have the cultural information to, say, decipher uniform here. But basic names and places that these people came from, these important visitors, weren't recorded. So it's just another aspect of the complexity of approaching the collection with some of our questions in mind. Next slide. The collection also holds examples of sitters who may not be Bengali but are key to kind of sorts of stories around partition, and then also Indian nationhood, and indeed Bangladeshi independence. And just two examples here of Iqbal and Indira Gandhi. Just to say, the Iqbal photograph comes from an album taken by Lady Ottoline Morell, a kind of British aristocrat who compiled these photo albums, and she visited England with her husband. But I would say it's very much, the albums are very, very touristic. So there are other photographs of India that she made throughout her travels. But I very much see it almost like as a touristic outside view that she is making. The next slide, please. And then just to really focus on some Bengali sitters pre-partition, I mean, the first name that came to my head, very, very obvious and most obvious, is Tagore, obviously, on the right there. And so we have a photographic representative of, of Tagore. And then this is another Maharaja Tagore. I don't think, I tried to do some research into the family tree, I don't think closely related to Tagore in any way, but I'd be interested to know if I was wrong in that sense. But what I wanted to say here was that when we are acquiring portraits, of Bengali sitters pre-partition, they're fitting into this model of great men, aren't they? This, like the British model, so that the Bengali sitters and subjects have to fit into the English construct of what a national portrait gallery desires to represent, and that's people who make a contribution. Yet those definitions may be different between different nations and communities. So it's quite a limited, we're very aware that that's quite a limited definition. Next slide, almost done. Just to say, once we get to the, more contemporary images, I think we're doing a lot better. And here I come back to that idea about change, that museums aren't static, and indeed that we are, we have this program, working with Tau Hamlets and with Citizen UK and with citizen researchers, which is so exciting. Again, sort of demonstrates that. But here we have, people, contemporary British people who have a Bangladeshi cultural history and who, identify quite strongly as having so, and it's quite evident in their work. And Monica Ali, Akram Khan, Ruma Godden, and the barrister Irene Khan. So the photographs collection, I think once we enter into certainly the 21st century, shows a lot more diversity, but we still have work we want to do and want to do with you, because again, as I said, it shouldn't only be about who we are judging as significant cultural contributors. And then just finally, really quickly, if I may, I wanted to show you these three images because they're taken by a photographer called Harry Diamond, and it's a very large collection that Diamond bequeathed to us when he passed away. Now, they're images made in Brick Lane. Diamond was a Jewish, Phil's video so beautifully spoke about the waves of immigration, multiculturalism in the East End. Now, Diamond was lived in the East End his whole life and was, part of that Jewish wave of immigration. And he made thousands, hundreds, if not thousands, of images through Brick Lane of his community. This is his community. And interestingly, that image on the top there, none of the images are identified. Next slide, just to show you, I just wanted to show you what the captions are, but it's unknown sitters, unknown boy, but just the dates there, you can see that they're really, really relevant. They're the exact times that we're kind of talking about with Bangladesh independence. And if we just go back to the images, it's just a really interesting, because there isn't very much information on our catalogue about these. There's certainly no information about the sitter, and I don't think that Diamond approached his sitters and asked them who they were. But I thought a point of discussion perhaps going forward might be a kind of research project which kind of map Diamond's interaction in the East End with other photographers and photographers making photographs of community in the East End around the same time, and trying to find out more about the connections to Bangladeshi history and community. The photo on the right just before I end was taken on Kinder Street. I do know that, so just for your information. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Magda. I mean, it's really great to see some of the photos from the gallery's collection, especially for those of us who might be new to the museum. I'm just moving on very quickly. If we introduce Koyis Miah, who's also a photographer. Koyis, do you want to introduce yourself and talk a bit about your work? I think you're muted, so you might have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Nishat. Thank you very much. Thanks, Magda, and thanks, Phil. Some really, really interesting stuff and amazing photographs from Phil. And I've spotted a couple, Phil, that I probably need just because of family connections and stuff like that. So I'll be in touch with you very shortly. So I'm a freelance photographer based in London, East London, mostly looking at kind of cultural issues and social issues. I am so to speak, a working photographer, and most of my work is kind of commission based. So it's a whole range of stuff. So I can't really say that 2 days are exactly the same. Some days are similar, obviously, but yeah, but it's the kind of personal projects that really speak to a photographer's kind of key interests. And I was kind of hoping to show you a set of pictures. I'm going to try it again, and then maybe I might need a bit of assistance from Halima and Sanjida, possibly. So I'm going to try and share my screen, and hopefully, yeah, you'll be able to see some stuff. So here we go. So it's my desktop. Is that visible?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, brilliant.
Oh, wait. I think that's your desktop.
Yep.
There we go.
Fab. So let me just see. Is that visible?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, good. Oh, good, 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 good. All right. Let me just try and get this. Hopefully that's still visible as well.
Yes, that's perfect.
Perfect. Thank you.
So I'll just kind of whiz through some images. So really, I mean, this is kind of general life of a photographer, particularly a freelance photographer. So it's a whole range of stuff. Like I said, no 2 days are that same. So it's really quite interesting. It's a varied, you know, work stream with different pressures, and you get access to lots of different people, and you have lots of different settings. So Phil talked about photojournalism. So some of my work includes that. Some of it's kind of seated portraits, which Magda also talked about. So I'll just whiz through these. So I cover a lot of cultural events. And sports. So that was just one of them. So I've kind of worked, like I said, mostly around East London, quite a lot of work with the Bangladeshi community. I used to be a staff photographer at the council on their free weekly newspaper called Eastern Life. Those of you that are familiar with Tower Hamlets might recall. And I've also worked internationally in China with, you know, people like ActionAid and Oxfam, looking at kind of renewable energy projects. I've looked at kind of, you know, the environmental climate change impact with communities, water-based, particularly water-based communities around Bangladesh. And some of the stories and kind of news pictures I've been fortunate enough to kind of have them featured in the FT magazine and Sunday Times, as well as the Guardian and other newspapers like that. So, I mean, my one claim to fame, if that can be the right term, is my picture of our current Prime Minister dangling on a zip wire. So this was during the Olympics while he was Mayor of London. So call it luck, or call it being at the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the wrong time, taking the wrong angles, I don't know. But that's my picture, which went on to kind of, you know, launching 1,000 memes, as they say, as well as being featured across the world. And it does come up from time to time, which is quite good for me in that sort of sense. So I'm Bangladeshi in terms of my parentage, if you like. I was born in Bangladesh, however, raised in Tower Hamlets really from the age of 5, and I've spent most of my life either living here or working here. So I have an obvious kind of personal connection with the people and the landscape. And I wanted to show you a couple of images from my current project, Brick Lane. Brick Lane, a community portrait, and it's kind of really trying to tell some of those untold stories of British Bangladeshis emanating kind of from the Brick Lane area, you know, the street that became the heart of a fledgling community in the 60s. I mean, both Magda and Phil talked about it in the 60s, and really, you know, the community was cemented throughout the 70s and the 80s with kind of families being brought over and stuff like that. And really what I'm hoping to do is capture narratives that are previously kind of untold. So, you know, the ordinary stories, lived experiences of family aspirations, you know, the migration journey, fighting racism, and kind of, you know, and fighting poverty in the East End, really, to, yeah, very much the ordinary stories. So hopefully I can show you these. And we might come back to this gentleman a bit later. I mean, at the moment at Four Corners, there's a wonderful window exhibition of Paul Trevor's work, you know, and similar to what that Phil's done, covering the anti kind of racism and protest stories from Brick Lane. Now, when I was looking through, actually with my wife and her family, I was looking through some of these photos, and one person caught their eye, and it was like, oh, who's he? He looks really familiar. And they started digging into what who some of these faces were, and they're ordinary guys who are now family guys, you know, that were at the forefront of the kind of anti-racism, anti-Nazism, you know, protest movement, right at the forefront. But very little is known of them, or they're mentioned very, very rarely. You know, you have notable people like, you know, Mala Sen and Farooq Dondi, as well as other kind of supporters who are mentioned, but none of these kind of ordinary guys. And it so happened that, you know, this is the father of a friend of ours. And when we kind of approached him and said, oh, is this your dad? And he's like, oh, I had no idea my dad was involved in anything like this. You know, so lots of those kinds of things are coming out. Oh, so let me just see, it won't let me skip. So maybe I'll just share. And again, I'll just skip. So I say this young man, you know, arrived in the 60s, had a restaurant in the very early days where, you know, members of the community would be able to kind of have food that was Bangladeshi, you know, cooked for them. Because if you think about the early kind of part of the migration story, it was very much single young men. So, you know, these were one of the kind of early pioneers of the Bangladeshi restaurants that you see around Brick Lane. Julie, who is quite a prominent figure in the community, which some of you may know. So that's that really. Hopefully that's a mixture of kind of photographs showing you the different types of commissions or the documentary or the portrait styles in terms of my work. And actually there was one other project that I wanted to show you very, very briefly. Is everyone still able to see my screen?
Yeah, you're coming in.
We are, yeah.
Brilliant. So in terms of, you know, communities around Tower Hamlets, you know, there's a estate in Poplar called Robin Hood Gardens, which again, some of you might be familiar with. So it's known as a kind of brutalist architecture, you know, estate. And, you know, for the last kind of 15, almost 20 years, there's been kind of a whole discourse around the architecture of the place, you know, is it a masterpiece, or is it something that's inner city, urban, run down? Should it be knocked down? You know, so loads of these conversations happening with this place. But in my view, you know, they missed out, this conversation missed out the crucial part, you know, the community that was living there. And although there would be a cursory kind of glance at a resident and a brief kind of interview, it was very much concentrated on, you know, look, is this a sink estate? So it's very much in negative light. So I thought, oh, that's really unfair, because I knew a couple of people who lived on the estate, and I thought it was really unfair that you know, the whole arguments or the discussions was mostly around the architecture, and the residents, the people there, you know, with their lived experiences were being totally neglected and taken out of the picture. So I embarked with a colleague friend of mine to do a bit of a photo story on the residents. So if I may flick through. And when we started talking to people, obviously, you know, the exact, well, I say exact, but almost the exact opposite of whatever the mainstream narrative was, you know, we found it to be the opposite. You know, obviously there are issues about maintenance, about overcrowding. You know, people had started out with very small families, but as you know, as they went on, their families grew and they outgrew the property. So there were obviously lots of issues, and there was lots of issues around, like I said, about maintenance and the upkeep. So as time went by, you know, it did get run down, but in terms of the people there, you know, they very much enjoyed the space that they have, the natural light, you know, the walkways. There was a sense of community. There was a sense of community spirit. There was a sense of safety for the residents there, because it's kind of a sort of an enclosed estate with a green in the middle, and parents could look from the balconies onto the green where the children were playing. And there'd be wonderful stories of, you know, children staying out late up until kind of, you know, early hours to late sunset, and they'd only be shouted out from their balconies by their parents to come in for lunch or dinner, you know, so that kind of sense of community, which was absolutely amazing.
Sorry,
I'm gonna. Sorry, I was just gonna say, if we just pause there, just in the interest of time. But thank you so much. I did want to get to your photos of the Robin Hood estate, and I'm sure that's going to come up in our discussion today. So we're going to move on very quickly and get to our big question for this afternoon. Thank you so much for sharing that, and to Phil and Magda too. So, as I said, our big question today is, whose image is it anyway? And so for the next 15-20 minutes, we are going to be looking at from the perspective of the photographer. So I'm sure we've got some great insights from Koyus and Phil, and also of the subject or the community being photographed, and then also of the kind of the depository, so where the photograph is stored, and that is sort of our museum or archive. We're going to kind of examine who our speakers would consider to be the owner of a photographic image. And I'd really like to do this through the sort of the timeline of a life of a photograph. So we'll start right at the kind of the beginning of this life, and think about who maybe the idea of a photograph belongs to. And I think that might be a battle fought between photographer and subject. So we've looked at, I mean, from looking at work by Phil and by Koyus, we've seen how you know what their relationship to the Bengali East End is. So I'm going to start off actually asking both of you, how have you collaborated with the subjects in your photography at the start, maybe in conceiving a photograph, in kind of whether that's the composition of a photograph, how a subject is seated maybe, or how they are photographed. So Phil, do you want to kick off?
Sure. So we're talking about collaboration, yeah, with the person in the photograph. Well, to be honest, I would describe myself as a street photographer. So really, I don't collaborate very much with the people that I take pictures of, because I use a whole range of techniques not to disturb the scene on the street,
and to photograph it as it is. On other occasions, obviously, I'm talking to people and then I take their photograph, etc. But I mean, there's some pictures I took on Brick Lane. I've taken thousands of pictures on Brick Lane. And when I had an exhibition in Brick Lane, in the Brick House, a few people did come up to me. There was one particular photograph of a Bangladeshi girl and her brother, who was about 4 at the time, crossing the road and avoiding the roadworks. And they pointed out to me, oh, that's my brother when he was, and I think he was about 18 then. So the collaboration occurred about 12, 14 years later when I gave them a copy of the print of the photograph. And that is happening all the time now because I'm putting my archive out there on the internet. So there's that kind of collaboration. And also there's a collaboration which is unspoken because you have to have respect for the people that you're taking the photographs of.
Is it okay now? Yeah.
Just make sure we're all muted.
Yeah, so there's that kind of, there's a whole kind of system of ethics that you kind of embrace or you don't embrace, I suppose, that are very important. I mean, I'm interested in the street because I value the people on the street because that's where I think humanity really is. So the collaboration sometimes is quite intense. Other times it's negligible or non-existent. And sometimes 10, 15, 20 years later, it becomes a bit more intimate.
Thank you. That's a really great way of putting it. And we are going to be talking about how we can collaborate after, many years after a photograph is taken, which is often the case. And what you've said about respect and ethics is definitely something that comes up a lot in street photography, I think. Koyas, just kind of off the back of that, do you think that there's a difference between the kind of agency that a subject holds before a photograph is taken, when it comes to is there a difference between that in street photography and then in seated portraits, maybe, because you have kind of dabbled in both?
Thanks. I mean, yeah, Phil described his work very eloquently, in not kind of disturbing the setting, as it were. Whereas quite a lot of my work is being sent out, or certainly in terms of the Brick Lane project, it's about very much, I mean, I'm not sure you can call it a full collaboration, but I very much want to, when I take my portraits, I have a preconceived idea about what I think a good photograph might be, or a good portrait might be. And that's informed about how much you know about that person. So when I started on the Brick Lane project, if I able to very quickly share a screen photograph again. Oops. Can you see this? So this is Afia. So when I was speaking to Afia over the phone, she talked very briefly about, her kind of journey from when she lived on Brick Lane and her kind of, career since, and some of her kind of personal story since. And so when she was a child in her formative years, she'd done a lot of music. So in later life, she decided that that's an area that she wanted to explore. Now, when I turned up to her house for a portrait, she's in kind of traditional clothing, sari, and a harmonium. And so she had a very strong idea about what she wanted to be photographed in. So that made my job a lot easier, in the sense that, all right, so how do I now place you somewhere? So we had an ongoing discussion. So in a way, you can talk about that as a collaboration. But a lot of the other kind of portraiture that I do is about, well, asking people, look, do you have so if I'm going to someone's house, say, for example, do you have a favorite backdrop? You know, do you have a wall? Do you have a backdrop? Or would you prefer to be photographed in the garden? Or, you know, forget COVID for now. I know COVID kind of has really complicated things for all of us. But normally that's what I'd like to do. Because I mean, I'm not here to I'm not there to make anyone look bad or kind of put them in a negative light. So I'd much rather ask, well, do you have a favorite spot? Or if it's around a particular story, or if it's something that they've done, have they got an item that relates to that story, or is there a backdrop that relates to that story? So whether it's kind of in the house or in situ or a place of work, you know, it's a collaborative thing in the sense that, you know, we like to have a discussion and hopefully some options come out.
Amazing. Thanks for kind of taking us through that. And I think that what we spoke about, respect and care as well, is really important as a photographer. So it's really nice to hear about how you do that. I mean, what you were talking about and the sort of the example you gave made me think of some of the photos that we saw from the portrait gallery collections. And obviously some of these really early photos, we get a sense a lot of the time that there isn't the sort of the agency that photographers practice today, and again that has a lot of links to the way that, you know, colonial photography. So Magda, I'm just on that topic. Have you come across? Can you talk a little bit more about the works that you've come across in the portrait gallery collection, where it's either clear or even implied that consent has not been given? And what your approach is to that kind of to that collection?
No, thanks, Nishat. It's a really interesting question. I just wanted to sort of respond to Phil too, because as a street photographer, you know, there's a whole tradition of, I guess, mostly 20th century to predominantly 20th century photography, street photography, where there isn't that, exactly as Phil said, the relationship of, say, perhaps asking permission, or when you're photographing the sitter is not part of the methodology of street photography. And you saw that in the Harry Diamond images too that I showed. But I don't think that means that they aren't collaborative, or that there isn't a sort of deep respect. That I don't think that makes them in some way problematic. And I think what Phil spoke about to me is about putting a kind of relationship, or the sense of ethics of that person, because, okay, you don't know the person, but if you're photographing them, you still have a relationship with them. So, but you're putting that relationship before the image, you know, in the choices that you make. So I think that certainly in Phil's work, it is really clear to me that he is deeply respectful, you know, even when it's a scene that's a street photograph that's been observed, and he hasn't, you know, met the sitters necessarily, or, you know, they might not be aware of being photographed. And I don't know, you know, there's so much more to know about Harry Diamond's work, but I feel that in his work too. And I think with COAs, you know, I think the other thing too is like this idea of like moving at the speed of trust, you know, so that you can only work when you're working with someone that you are making a portrait of, you know, you have to navigate the kind of relationship between you and the choices that you make and they make. And again, in COAS's work, even though he may not have a lot of time he may or may not have spent a lot of time, or may not know, you still can sense there's that appreciation of kind of not pushing himself forward, you know, into a dominant situation with his sitters. You know, so, you know, the photos are, you know, I mean, I think that they're ideas that come from it's actually sort of an architectural collective called the Black Space Collective in America, and this idea of moving at the speed of trust, of, you know, the relationship comes before the image or the outcome, you know, the artwork. You know, it's about being regenerative, not extractive, you know, and I think I see that so clearly in Phil and COAS's important practices. At the portrait gallery, you know, it's difficult because that some of the early material that I showed you, that the, you know, Victorian photographs, I think the point of view of the photographer and the kind of colonial context is so strong and dominant that it's hard to mitigate it now, other than talking about it and being aware of it. But certainly in our contemporary photographs, you know, of course we would always expect and anticipate that there was, I mean, you know, yeah, I think COAS made a point too, because collaboration is a funny word and can mean so many different things, and it may or may not be collaborative to different extents, and you don't have to have some sort of academic framework around or methodology of collaboration, but in the way that you approach the subject, those things that I just spoke about, I think those are expectations that we have of a relationship between a sitter and a photographer in contemporary portraiture. Does that answer the question? Sorry.
No, I think you've addressed that quite well, and thank you also for your opinions on how Phil and COAS approach their work. And going back to what Phil said earlier about how he's almost managed to collaborate in a sense some years on after a photograph has been taken. Let's talk a little bit about that and whether ownership shifts over time. You know, once that photograph has been taken and the photographer walks away from their subject, who owns that photo that's just been created? And Phil and COAS, what kinds of have you encountered any challenges? So, you know, just after the photo is taken, has anyone maybe come to you and expressed a different sort of emotion about that photo being taken?
Do you want me to respond?
Yeah, you go ahead, yeah.
Okay, well, first of all, I wanted to congratulate COAS for collaborating very effectively with Boris Johnson and getting him stuck on the high wire down in Docklands. That was an extraordinary thing that you did there. And I take my hat off to COAS for...
Thank you very much. It was all down to me, Phil. It was all down to me.
No, it's a great shot. Well, I mean, I think photographs have a life of their own. When you take them, and the beauty of photography is that you take photographs all your life, but somebody's put in the questions, what's your most favourite photograph? Well, I'm not sure I have one, but probably my most famous one is one I took in Brick Lane Laundrette, where I used to go to do my washing, and I took about 10 frames on black and white HB5 film back in the day, and surreptitiously, I think they were drying and I was washing, and the clothes, that is, and it was made into a postcard. Then, when it was made into a postcard, someone else told the people who were actually in the photograph about the image, and over a period of 20 odd years, I got to know the mother and the daughter, who was, I've been told, conceived shortly after I took the photograph. And the daughter contacted me and said, you know, can I have a copy of the photograph? But I suppose as a socialist, I would say my images and the images I take in my lifetime do belong to the community, because I like to have an alternative narrative from the mainstream media, and I like to big up the many, not the few, and tell the history of the majority of people, working class people in the community. that's not to say, of course, that I'm not going to charge people like, you know, newspaper editors, etc., or magazines for my photographs, because I have to pay the rent. But in terms of ownership, you know, as an artist, I hope that I'm passing something on to do with heritage, which has an alternative narrative to the mainstream media narrative.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, I've sort of just listened to what you're saying there. I've sort of, you said it all, and I thank you also for addressing the sort of the next question that I had. Really, is that, you know, after a copy's been made of a photograph, and you know, sometimes several decades on, that then can be copied and distributed quite widely. That, I mean, how does ownership change then? I mean, but even when it legally belongs either to yourself as a creator, or you know, you may have handed over rights to a museum or an archive, which is storing the photograph. Does the ownership change then? Who does it then belong to? Who might we then say is the owner? Chloe, have you had that this you know, have you had this issue with your work just yet, where you've had to deal with this in some way?
I mean, to be just to kind of expand on kind of Phil and some of what Magda's also talked about. I mean, you know, when we talk about ownership, what are we talking about? You know, there is this kind of possible slight conflict in terms of, you know, are we talking about legal ownership, or are we talking about moral ownership? So, you know, I think there's lots of kind of discussions to be had. I mean, as a creator of imagery or whatever it is, you know, then you kind of get into, you know, in terms of the legal side, in terms of copyright and all of that kind of stuff. So, and, you know, and it is a living that photographers have to make. So, you know, there has to be, I think when you look at kind of community projects or looking at communities, there should be some sort of give back. Now, whether you give prints for subjects who sit for you or who are part of your project, you know, is one thing. But again, you know, whether you know, legal ownership is transferred or implied or anything like that is another set of you know, and sometimes quite difficult questions. You know, on the street, as Phil probably will attest, you know, the street is I don't want to use the word kind of free for all in the sense that it's totally unregulated, but in terms of street photography, it's a public space. So, you know, in terms of what you're legally able to photograph, you can photograph anything in the public sphere. So there are loads of those kinds of difficulties that come up. You know, if you're around a sensitive building, or, you know, if you're around the city, what tended to happen is security guards would come out and say, oh, you can't photograph here, which is absolute total nonsense. You know, so long as you're in a public space, then you have every right to photograph. So I've had issues of that. Obviously, there's people on the street, and if they're walking past and they don't want to be photographed, sometimes people will stick their hands up or shout across, or even quite nicely say, would you mind not, you know, having me in the photograph? So when exchanges like that are quite amicable, then, you know, I think, you know, for photographers or any kind of decent minded photographer, you know, you kind of respect that and kind of delete. You know, we now work mostly digital, so, you know, you have that option to delete straight away. Now, you know, like I said, I'm not in the business of doing contentious work or making people uncomfortable. But sometimes, you know, you do have a really good photograph, and someone in that photograph will say, look, I don't want to be photographed. So then you're in a really sticky situation, because on the one hand, you can see that you've got a decent photograph and it's something that you want to keep, and there's merit in keeping, but at the same time, someone said or expressed uncomfortableness. So what do you do? So, you know, some moral kind of questions around that.
You're absolutely right. And, you know, as a photographer and as a museum professional myself, I'm always torn between that. So I completely understand that. I think what you've said there about the kind of the confusion and the meaning of copyright and ownership is definitely can be confused a lot of the time, and I think I see that in our chat box there. Just from the perspective actually of somebody who works for a museum, Magda, can you talk a little bit about the sort of the role of the museum here, the role of the portrait gallery? How do you consider, I mean, in the process of legally obtaining rights to an image, which is what you do a lot of the time, do you kind of consider ways that you might be able to, again, collaborate with the relevant groups after you've acquired that? And maybe talk a little bit about the portrait gallery's collecting policy. What do you collect and why?
Yeah, I mean, I see, and I think my colleagues at the Portrait Gallery, we see ourselves as custodians of photographs, in my case, or custodians of visual culture, and that's important. And I think the other things about museums, which is like a construct of, I guess, from, in the Portrait Gallery's case, from Victorian times on, is this idea of you kind of owning this, you're a custodian of this visual culture forever. So it's like forever. It's not like one lifetime. It's you know, that a big part of a museum collection is that visual culture is accessible and available for all time. So that you have to think in quite specific ways about what ownership might mean or how to care for a collection. But as we've seen, I mean, I think the thing is, it's about accessibility, I think. So if you're a custodian, who are you serving? Who is it? Who are we caring for these images, on whose behalf? And, you know, I think that's really, really important to bear in mind when you're making the decisions, some decisions, you know, and it's about, as like I said, museums change in many ways, but, you know, it's like in now, you know, things like digitization processes where we can make images available to people around the world. So it's not even in a single, you don't have to visit a physical building in a country. But it's also about information, as we've seen in the Portrait Gallery collection, because it's very hard for images, photographic images, to be accessible or understood or accessed by a community who should and could and should or may want to access them. Photographs of people's family, if you don't have that basic information. So, you know, some of those photos by Harry Diamond, let's say, you know, they could be street photos, or portraits that could be relatives of living people. But you know, if you don't have basic information around an image, you know, it's very hard to make it accessible. So I think that for the Portrait Gallery, in collecting material and wanting to do that in a custodial way, and in a way that we do it because of accessibility and so that it's around for generations and generations and generations to come. Also going with that physical object has to be this sort of contextual information. Yeah, if that.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that the gaps in either, I mean, you mentioned earlier the biographical information that you have of an item, and yeah, that contextual knowledge is absolutely important. And so I imagine that a lot of the time that role lies with, or I guess that responsibility lies maybe with the creator of an image. Would you agree, Phil? Is it your role to record and to document that the story behind the photograph for years to come?
Yes, I think so, to a certain extent, but I think I would like to say something about copyright, because in defense of photographers, because photographers, like, you know, artists in general, are always getting ripped off. And I remember watching Channel 4 News once, and there was a music video, or about 20 seconds of it, that was put up, and there was a photograph of mine in it that I'd taken of housing in the East End. and it had been used without my permission. And so thanks to advice, I suppose, that had been given many years ago by the great David Hoffman, a magnificent photographer who's been living in the East End for a very long time, I pursued my copyright and got the money back. And I'm sure lots of photographers will have stories to tell you about how their work has been ripped off. I don't mind children or people who are studying using my images for those purposes, but when they get ripped off, put in a film or put in a magazine without your permission, and you rely for your livelihood.
Everyone gone.
Don't apologise, because I've forgotten as well.
Well, I think you were talking a little bit about you know, your practice as a photographer, and it's absolutely important that you that artists get their dues. And so, you know, in the chat box before we closed, I noticed that there were a few questions about, you know, what does copyright mean? And so artistic copyright obviously is a little bit different to, you know, legally holding or legally having. Thank you so far to our speakers. I mean, just on the issue, well, I guess the question of reclaiming a photograph. So as we spoke about ownership and how, you know, holding rights again. Do you see, I mean, Phil, over the course of your career and Kois over yours, do you see that photographs being taken, you know, a few decades ago are being reclaimed, particularly by the Bengali community in the East End? And how have you seen that? How might that present itself?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. I think that's quite a complex question involving kind of, again, you know, the legal kind of ownership, moral ownership. But I think if we can slightly reframe that a little bit, you know, if we talk about, and Magda alluded to this in terms of kind of accessibility, and if I can throw the word kind of consumption in there as well, you know, how do we consume these things? How is it accessible to all of us? And I think it would be a little bit kind of remiss if we didn't mention, you know, like the Black Lives Matter movement and the incidents, you know, that have happened over the course of the last year. It's really kind of, I think, started a discussion point about perhaps maybe more about institutions and whether you're kind of overlooking, you know, communities. So, you know, there's lots of discussions around, you know, our communities being overlooked. What kind of narrative are the photographs taking on? And especially if you think about kind of news photography at the moment, you know, is there a bias towards particular sections of the community? Are people kind of looking to create, you know, whatever the hot political issue is at the moment with, you know, with a particular community and stereotypes and stuff like that? So I think, you know, there's all those sorts of kind of discussions and questions arising. But in terms of reclaim, I'm not sure. I'm not sure even whether I know what that means. But in terms of a photographer, but in terms of maybe someone from the Bangladeshi community, what I would say is, you know, you've got fantastic photographs that have been taken by the likes of, you know, David Hoffman, Paul Trevor, Phil, you know, Raju Vaidyanathan around Brick Lane. So I think I, for one, am grateful that those photographs have been taken, that they've captured a moment in time, and there's definitely 100% truth to that. And like I said, you know, in terms of personally and people that we know in the community, and again, this comes back to Phil, the photograph that I want, you know, you've got a photograph of one of my brother-in-laws who was demonstrating against the BNP, against Derek Deacon around Brick Lane. Now, he's since passed away, you know. So now that photograph, that image of him with a, you know, megaphone, shouting on the street with his friends, demonstrating, you know, holds something really dear and personal to, you know, my wife's family for sure, and for someone that I haven't met fully, you know, because this is quite a long time ago. So it's important that photographs get taken. And then I think we can talk about all the issues maybe that come afterwards. But look, photographers, whether you're a Black photographer, Bengali photographer, or a, you know, white English photographer, there's loads of things out there that have to be photographed, that have to be documented. And hopefully, you know, from that and showing that, and then we can talk about consumption and access and all the rest of it, you know, then discussions come from that, you know, as a route. So I'm quite grateful, but I'm not sure about how we reclaim or what that discussion.
Can I ask Koyas, is that photograph, is that of Magda?
No, it's not. It's someone called Kamal.
Okay.
In Brick Lane. But I'll email you about, I've seen it a couple of times now, and I'll be meaning to get a print from you.
Koyas, can I come in just for a minute?
Hi, Raju.
Yeah, sorry, Koyas, you know how slow I am in trying to archive my, you know, but I think about 2 months ago, I did take out a box, and I have got a picture from 92 of your brother-in-law. Yeah. I think I told you years ago that I have a photo. I remember I have photos I took in 92 of the meetings and everything. Yeah. And I have found it. I don't think I've scanned it yet. But I just want to say I have found it, and I will, you know, I told somebody in Singapore that, oh, I've got this photo, I've got the photo at last, you know, and we were trying to work out who these people are, you know, but I will get you the photo.
Brilliant. Thank you, Raju. Thank you. So in terms of ownership, you know, certainly as the family of your subjects, we'd certainly want to own a print of
I mean, last Friday, someone stopped me. I don't know who. Some man stopped me in the street, and he said, "Can I just show you the photo you took of me?" And I took this photo in '88.
Wow!
And he was a kid, and he said, "Raju, that is me." And I didn't even know who this person was. So I said to him, "Give me, you know, take my number down. I'll go into a darkroom and print this." Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, people don't want prints. They want it sent on the mobile phones.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for. Yeah, that last part here, I think here, I suppose reclaiming means engaging and re-engaging, and this is a form of research. I think that you are able to get into touch with people who can help you find out more about your own community. I think that's really what I was trying to get at. So I think inadvertently we managed to address that. And it's a great note that, you know, the points that you made about going forward, especially in the light of kind of the new practices, new ways of respecting communities, things that have come out over the course of this past year, that's kind of stemming, I guess, from this second wave of Black Lives Matter protests. I think that's a really, really important point to make. And I wanted to talk more about the future of the art of photography and curating photography. And I think that we've all addressed that really well, and with respect and with care, as we spoke about earlier. So I think that naturally maybe concludes our discussion today. And again, I just want to say thank you to our speakers for engaging so well together. Thank you to Raju for chipping in as well. And yeah, telling us your thoughts on this really important topic that we definitely haven't heard the end of just yet. So thank you, and I will hand back over to Halima now.